Hey everyone, Brad here from Heavy Diesel Softworks, and today I'm going to go over part 1 of the magazine Firearm tutorial. Alright, so we're going to start off in Maya, and for this tutorial, we're going to rig the gun up and get it ready to go into Unreal Engine 4. In the future, I will be doing a Blender version of this tutorial, but I actually tried to do the Blender version first, and I couldn't make heads or tails of the armature system. And so, in respect to time, I decided to go back to Maya, where I actually did know what I was doing to some extent. So here we are, and we're going to go ahead and get started with turning this AKM right here into a game-ready piece of art. So I got this model from Chamfer Zone. He has it on sale for $1. It's his example weapon. He makes lots and lots of other weapons. You may recognize him from the Ultimate FPS Weapons Pack on the Unreal Engine Marketplace. He also has a tutorial showing how to make a weapon in 3ds Max, Substance Painter, and Marmoset, which is very similar to the way we make weapons. And we do not have any affiliation with Chamfer Zone. I just wanted to show y'all guys that because he makes some good stuff, and the tutorial is pretty good, and his weapons are good too. So that's where we get this particular firearm, and yeah. So when you're going to go about making a gun, you need for Weapon Master, you need to know a couple things. One, you need to know if it is a self-loading or a manual loading gun. The AKM is a self-loading rifle, meaning that when you fire it, it will reload itself. It will chamber around on its own. We also need to know if it's reciprocating or non-reciprocating. The AKM is reciprocating, which means that every time you fire, the bolt and the charging handle, or slide, will move at the same time. So every time you fire, this charging handle and this bolt section right here will move back together. They never move separately. With a non-reciprocating gun like the M4 or AR-15 or the Tavor, the bolt, when you fire, will move on its own, and the charging handle will stay still. Lastly, you need to know if you have a last shot hold open, or if there is no last shot hold open. And what that means is, on the last shot, if you have last shot hold open, the bolt will stay back. And with a lot of modern guns, that's the way they work. But with the AKM, the AKM does not stay back on the last shot, so it will go all the way forward, meaning there is no release for the gun. So now that we know those things, we can go ahead and set things up. Since we are a reciprocating firearm, or we have a reciprocating bolt, we only need two pieces to the actual gun. We need the body, and we need the bolt, and the bolt carrier group in this case, which will be the charging handle and the bolt together. If it was a non-reciprocating gun, you would have three parts: the body, the charging handle, and the bolt itself. But for this one, we just need the bolt, charging group, and the actual body of the gun. The other pieces that will come with this is the magazine, which is its own piece, and the bullet, which also is its own piece. So let's go ahead and get started. It's actually, you could do this with only one bone, but I like to have, at least in the body of the gun, a few helper bones, so when we're attaching things like the magazine or the bolt carrier group, they attach really easy in engine. So we're going to have a couple bones. Also, if you want to have animations, which we are going to show in this, like the trigger moving or this selector switch moving, we're going to put bones there so that we can actually do animations on the gun that are separate from the actual movement of the bolt. So, starting out, we are going to go ahead and create a bone. We're going to go to create joints to create our thing, or to get our little thing down here. I'm going to select this, and we have created a joint, but it's way off on its own. So let's get it zeroed out, just so we know. And we need to go to our shading and make sure we have X-ray joints so you can see the joint. You can see it's right there. Now this first joint is what is going to be the handle joint. This needs to be roughly where you want your gun to attach to the character's hand or the motion controller. And you may notice something here that I'm noticing, that the gun is off center on the x-axis with its parts. So let's go ahead and select all of these, minus the bullet and the shell, because it appears they are on axis. They have a 0 up here, so let's go ahead and grab all of these, everything, and go ahead and 0 those out. Alright, so everything should be directly in line now. I did have the bullet selected, but it didn't matter because it was already a 0. So that's better. Now that everything is in line, you want everything to stay directly on that x-axis. So we're going to call this joint AKM handle. Now we're going to need, I'm going to go ahead and say let's do this. We're going to create a few joints coming off of this joint. Not chains, but actual just different joints coming off. So let's grab our joint tool, AKM handle. Oh, that's a chain. And every time we create one of these joints, we need to make sure we're selecting the this AKM handle joint, so that we're creating completely separate ones. All right, we've got 4 now. Let's work with those. Or we've got 3. Sorry. Let's go ahead and 0 all of those out on the x-axis. Okay. Alright, for this first one, we're going to make this this joint 3 right here. We're going to make this a magazine joint. So let's move this about right here, and we're going to match our actual skeletal mesh, our actual joint for our magazine up with that, so that when we bring it into the engine, the socket lines up perfectly and it's really easy to handle. This joint right here, joint number 2, is going to be our trigger joint. And we're going to attach the trigger to this joint so that when this joint rotates, when this bone rotates, joints and bones are essentially the same thing. When this joint rotates, it will rotate the trigger, and we'll use that in game or in engine to actually show the trigger moving when you press the trigger on the controller. And this joint right here, we're going to joint 1 is going to be the joint that rotates the selector switch right here. So we're going to go ahead and label these. We'll call this the selector joint. Joint 2 is the trigger joint. Oops, forgot to put a... And then joint 3 is the magazine joint. Now, we're going to add a couple helper joints to this as well. Namely, I want to add a... Go ahead and select AKM handle. I want to add a joint because I want to have one attachment. Now, this gun doesn't actually take attachments in real life. but we're going to have a side attachment up here just so I can show you all how to do attachments on this particular gun. So we're going to put this right here, and we're going to call this joint side attachment joint. Now let's make sure we have all of our joints in the correct place. We need one more, sorry. Grab the joint, set another one. We're going to call this one the bolt attachment joint. And this is just another helper joint that we'll be messing with here in just a second. Okay, all those are zeroed out. It doesn't matter that this one isn't zeroed out. It's kind of placed in the right area where we're going to attach it. You don't have to have them zeroed out, but on these, it just makes it easier to work with. Especially on the ones that rotate. So, got a bolt attached. Okay, now let's make sure these are all in the correct area. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to wireframe. I'm going to go to X-ray joints, and let's do the selector joint. Now we want this joint directly in the middle of this space right here, so when the selector rotates, it rotates correctly. So let's do a little movement, and let's get this in the right spot. It's roughly in the right height. Maybe down a little bit. Alright, that's good for now. We'll test it in a minute. Let's take this trigger joint and let's see. Let's put this a little bit higher. Right there looks good. We'll grab the bolt attachment joint, and we want to put this right at the back of the bolt carrier group. If your gun has a bolt, you want this right at the back of the bolt, which is this line right here, I believe. Let's make sure. Nope, I'm off. This line right here. This will just make attaching the bolt a little bit easier when we add a socket to it. Alright, close enough. Alright, so we've got the magazine joints there. Okay, so we've got our joints set up. Let's start adding pieces of the gun to the joints to make sure that they're going to rotate correctly. So we'll go back to the dolly view, and we're going to start with the safety switch, which is this piece right here. So we're going to drag the safety switch and add it to the selector joint. And you'll see it gets added in under the hierarchy. We're going to select the selector joint, and I'm going to rotate it and just make sure it rotates correctly. It's not rotating off axis. Look at it right here. And it appears to be doing exactly what we want it to be. So that's pretty good. We're in good shape there. Make sure your rotations are 0, so you haven't saved any rotations. Do the same thing for the trigger. Rotate it. Oh, I'm stupid. Forgot to add. This is what happens when you forget to add the mesh to it. So you grab your trigger mesh, add it to the trigger joint, gets added to the hierarchy. Don't be a dummy like me. Alright, let's see. That looks pretty good. I think that's in the correct position. Go ahead and zero that back out. So we've added those two joints. Now the rest of the body of the gun, the rear sight leaf, the actual body, are all going to be part of the AKM handle, which is the main portion of the gun, this first joint. So let's go ahead and grab the AKM body part right here, add it to the AKM handle. the rear sight leaf, which honestly, if you wanted to, and you're doing a gun like this, you could add a joint to this so that you could rotate this up and down. And you'd have to decide where you'd want the joint, probably somewhere right in here, where it's supposed to rotate right there. It's supposed to be a pin right there, but anyways. And you could have that rotate up and down to do a zeroing of the AKM. But for our usage, we're going to keep it exactly as it is right now. I will show you. Well, anyways, let's move on. We'll tackle that when we get there. So we need to put the body. It's already part of it. Let's take this rear sight leaf, and we're going to add it to the AKM handle too. So that means that if I turn all this stuff off, what we're left with are these other pieces that also need to have their own skeleton. These are all going to have very simple skeletons, being only one bone, but we do need to add skeletons because they're all going to be separate pieces that we bring into the engine. So let's get started with the magazine. Now we're going to go up and we're going to create a bone. Put it on 0. And then we are going to match this up with the bone we already have. You can snap this using the snap command, but I'm just going to move it in place because I don't remember the snap command offhand. Alright. We're going to call this joint magazine, or AKM. AKM Magazine. We're going to add the actual magazine mesh to the bone. So we have a magazine. Now let's do the bolt. So we'll select the bolt. We're going to create a new bone. We're going to label this bone AKM Bolt carrier group. We're going to position this where our guide bone is. Move it up here. And again, this will just make it positioned correctly, so when we add it to the engine, everything will be gravy. It'll more easily be, you won't have to do any like manual tweaking or much manual tweaking. That's weird. Make sure we get this right there. Alright, we're good. So now we add the bolt carrier group to this bone. See, it's added right there. Which leaves us with the bullet and the shell. So let's create another bone. zero out the X. Let's go ahead and bring it up. And we want this bone to be right at the back of the shell right here. The casing, sorry, the casing. We're going to call this AKM Bullet. And that should be the center line. Yeah, that's it. Okay, that looks good. And now we add the bullet and the shell to AKM Bullet. So, let's see. Let's go back into this. One thing we need to do is we also need to have a shell. So what we're going to do is select this, all of it. We're going to do Edit, Duplicate Special. I'm going to call this AKM Shell. And I need to capitalize the K. We're going to delete the bullet part for the shell. AKM, let's call this shell empty, just so it'll have its own name. So we have the bullet, and if we hide this bullet, you can see that after we've deleted that bullet, we have the shell by itself. It still has the same attachment point. So let's turn bullet back on. Okay, so now we need to look at. Ooh, that's a problem. So I have moved my bolt carrier group way over here, something I didn't notice, and I'll show you how to fix this. Take your mesh, pull it out so it's not attached to the bone anymore. We're going to reset the x-axis on this bone, and then we are going to take this and add this back. So there we go. Now we're good. Now if you just tried to move the bone, it would have moved this with it. See how it's moving? You don't want that. Alright, so let's see. We've got things rotating, we've got a magazine, we've got bones where we want them, we've got a side attached bone. I'm going to show you how to roughly, see, I'm not sure what my settings are right now, but if you were to zero this, let's say you have your settings set to centimeters, or feet, or whatever. Let's see. Let me do some math. Centimeter to feet. Centimeter to yards, sorry. So we want 50 yards. That's like 4,572 centimeters. So if your current settings are in centimeters, what you would do is you would create a line that starts from right here and goes just over the top of that, and you would basically make a line that goes all the way out however many centimeters, 4,572, and then you would move, let's see, I don't think you can move this. they want you to move this. Okay, here's a better way. Do it from this point right here, and then angle, you would rotate. Actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do this in engine. And we're going to add an extra bone so that we can change the actual height on this. So hold on one second. We're going to do something, because I think this is going to be better than doing this in. It's going to make. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to zero this gun at 50 yards, and it's going to be way easier, I think, to do that in the engine than it is here in Maya. So we're going to add another bone. If your gun needs to be zeroed, you can do it in the 3D modeling program, but you can also do it in Unreal, and I'm going to show you how to do it in Unreal. So let's add another bone. We're going to call this bone the what is this? Rear sight joint. And we're going to get this rear sight joint in the correct position to rotate. Oops, don't want to do that. That would be bad. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but we can move this stuff out so it doesn't do that anymore. And we want this right up in here. There's actually a pin right there. I wonder if that's what that's supposed to be. We'll do it right like that. This can rotate up and down. Yeah. Okay, let's try that right there, that position. 1, 0, good to go there. Let's add this rear sight leaf to the rear sight joint. And then let's select the joint. Perfect. I think that's rotating well. Let's just take a look. Yeah. I think that's going to look good. Alright. So let's add our other parts back into the gun, trigger, safety switch. Go ahead and rotate those, make sure everything's looking good. Good. Alright. So, we're going to do our zeroing in the engine for this gun. Now we've got everything ready to ship out or to export. What we need to do is we need to zero our main joint for each skeletal mesh system. That means that do not select the joints that are inside, because if you do, it's actually going to move them to the 0 point. It's going to move their actual position, and you don't want that. We just want to move the top of the hierarchy to 0.0 for everything. And so we're going to go ahead and do that. First, before we do that, I'm going to save. And I've already done this before, so I've got a save file right there. And I'm going to save over it. So we've got a save file, and let's go ahead and start exporting. First thing we need to do is move this to 0, 0. And then we need to select everything. So get the top of the hierarchy, select hierarchy, it selects it all. File, export selection. And we're going to do an FBX export. Make sure you are exporting smoothing groups, smooth mesh, an animation, and bake animation. The reason why is we want there to be an animation created so that we can duplicate it and make some animations in Unreal. Z-axis up, and then we give it a name, and we're going to give it a spot to actually save to. And I've got my AKM folder here. So we're going to call this the AKM Body. And we're going to export selection. So now I need to say this. If all you had selected was this joint and you exported it, it would have only exported that joint. It would not have actually exported any of these other pieces, and you would be without cool stuff in, you know, Unreal to work with. So make sure that you're either selecting everything by individually selecting them or using the select hierarchy right there. Next up, we're going to do the magazine, but first I'm going to hide this mesh so it just kind of gets it out of the way. So when you do the magazine, we're going to zero it out. Oops. And we're going to select hierarchy, file, export selection, AKM Magazine, export selection. Now we're going to go to off. To hide that, we're going to grab our bolt carrier group. We're going to zero it out. And you're going to notice that if you click on the actual mesh, it's going to have some translate values. That's fine. Just make sure that you've zeroed out your actual bone or joint. And we're going to select hierarchy. Export selection. This is going to be the AKM Bolt carrier group. Export selection. Deselect. Let's go ahead and turn it off. Hide it. Let's select the bullet. Select hierarchy. File. Export selection. AKM Bullet. Off. AKM shell. Select hierarchy. File. Export selection. AKM shell. Alright, and now you might want to save everything as another file, preferably. Otherwise, you may find it a little annoying to come back and work on things when they've already been zeroed. As you see, as I show all this stuff, it's going to be all jumbled up now because all of their points are going to be at 0, but that's okay. Now in the next video, we will begin working in the engine. We'll bring in the what we just made, and we will start actually building the gun out in the engine with sockets and everything else. So I will see you in that video. Thanks.